delivers to you. Homebuyer's Guide is brought to you by Iowa Realty, Iowa's largest.
Steve Oswalt on TV8, Iowa's news leader.
What social and legal aftershocks will follow this week's violence? We'll talk to Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates about his city, his police force, and his future. And to the Bush administration point man, Health and Human Services Secretary Louis Sullivan. And we'll take another look at the Rodney King case with the Chief Prosecutor Terry White and Defense Attorney Paul DePasquale. Aftermath of the Rodney King verdict, an issue facing the nation.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Scheiffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Scheiffer.
And welcome to the broadcast. We're going to start this morning by going directly to Los Angeles, where Police Chief Daryl Gates is in our CBS News Bureau. Good morning, Chief Gates. Thank you for coming. Why don't you first give us an update on just what the situation is out there today?
Well, fortunately, the last 2 days have been very, very peaceful, particularly last night. As you know, we've had a curfew on for the last 4 days, and if you look at our streets in the evening, you'll find that there's practically no one out on the streets, very few cars. Traffic, we certainly have done something for the movement of traffic. You can move on our streets very, very quickly. It's been quiet. And we're very, very pleased. We have a large contingent of law enforcement and military in our streets, and we will continue that until we are assured that peace has been restored.
How long do you think you'll have to keep the curfew on?
Well, I don't know. Certainly it's going to go through this evening, and then we'll take a look at it tomorrow. Perhaps we can lift it, if we have 2 or 3 days of total peace. I would think that that would be appropriate to begin lifting the curfew.
And Chief, when would you think the situation would be such that you could recommend to the governor that the National Guard troops be taken off the street?
Well, I would hope that we could continue on. As you know, we now have federal troops. The National Guard has been federalized. We have Marines and Army troops also. I would hope that we could go through the next 3 or 4 days with those troops here in the streets in a peaceful mode, and then I think we could be very assured that we could begin sending them home.
Chief, it will come as no surprise to you to hear that that your department has been severely criticized for kind of a sluggish response to all of this. Why did you not react more quickly when this verdict came in?
Well, it's kind of interesting that everything I did, said, indicated, was suggested as being provocative before this incident occurred. We set aside $1 million, for example, such an innocuous thing of setting aside $1 million for overtime just in case this happened. I talked to all of my people and told them that they needed to respond to whatever the verdict was with a great deal of maturity and calm and professionalism, and that was considered provocative. I was asked many times what I was doing in terms of deploying personnel, and I indicated we would have heavy deployment, that we were ready for a contingency of this kind. That was provocative. We deployed in what we thought was a very balanced number of personnel, a very balanced deployment. And no one knew, first of all, when this verdict was going to come out, and no one knew what the verdict was going to be, and no one knew what the response was going to be. We will admit we were shocked as everyone. We were in the first stages of this overwhelmed, and it took us a little while to move from the ordinary deployment of our personnel to a deployment which is necessary to put down a civil disturbance or a riot of this kind.
Well, can you clear up one thing for me, Chief? Sure. Did you, in fact, leave your post after this trouble started in order to attend a political event that had been organized to raise money to oppose the police reform initiative that's going to be on the ballot?
Well, you know, some have suggested that I left my post. Frankly, I had a commitment. Once again, we were not engaged in a full-scale riot at that time. I was on my way to that location when some of the first disturbances broke out. We had people in place. I was on the telephone, on the radio, giving orders. I went there for just a very few minutes, excused myself, and went right back to handling the affair.
You think on reflection, perhaps you should have just turned around and gone back to the office?
Well, there's no question about it. On reflection, I wish I had of, because the criticism that comes from it. But I was very close to the location at the time that the incident broke out. I simply went over, excused myself, and left. I was there only 5 minutes or so.
Chief, what position do you have on the officers now who have now been found not guilty? Do you think they ought to be welcomed back to the department? I know there's going to be a hearing in the department, but how do you feel about it at this point?
Well, I don't think I can voice any feelings at this point. They are entitled to an administrative hearing, and they will receive that administrative hearing, and I am the judge. When that decision is rendered, then I look at it. It is a recommendation to me, and then I must make the decision on whether or not to carry out that recommendation. So for me to indicate, I've tried to say this over and over again through this past year, that for me to indicate guilt or innocence of these officers would be prejudging. There's been an awful lot of prejudging in this case, and I don't think I ought to be doing it. I have my own feelings about it. I will have even stronger feelings as I go through all of the administrative information that's provided to me from that investigation. But I don't want to voice that, my feelings about the case.
Let me ask you this, and I don't know how to ask you except just to ask it. You have been such a flashpoint throughout this case. You say you're planning to step down in, what, June or July. Do you think it might add to the healing process if you step down immediately?
Well, you know, some have suggested that that would have been the right thing to do, and my view was that that would be running from a problem. People ask me if I was accountable, responsible, and my answer to that is, of course, I'm responsible and accountable. But I don't think you run from a problem. I think you stand there, you face it, and you try to deal with it. We had a crisis in the department. Moving out would have, I think, increased the crisis. People have to understand also that there's more to running a police department than simply installing someone new there. People within the department expect leadership. They expect somebody who's there that they can depend upon for support. I was that individual, and I've stayed through it. I've indicated now that it's time for my retirement, and I will take that retirement. Let
me ask you a final question, Chief. Everyone said, well, would you do anything differently? I don't want to ask you just this. Obviously, there are some things that anyone would do differently, but just in a general way, you pioneered the kind of approach of bringing massive force to bear when trouble breaks out, the SWAT team concept, and so on. Looking back on it, do you think now that that was the right philosophy? Would you go to a different kind of approach now had you to do it over again?
Well, in policing a major city, you've got to have a balanced approach. You know, the hue and cry now is for community-oriented policing. We have been involved in community-oriented policing in a very heavy way for a long period of time, but you must have a balance in policing. People are concerned about crime and violence on the streets. I think we have given them that balanced approach. We are aggressive, there's no question about it. It's kind of interesting, it's ironic almost. Now people are saying we weren't aggressive enough in this initial stages of the riot, and they've been complaining about me being too aggressive over all of my tenure as chief of police. It's very, very difficult to give it to them both ways, but that's the kind of approach I think the policing has to have, a balanced approach, so that we respond quickly and handle crime, deal with it aggressively, proactively, and yet have a partnership with the community. If you don't have that kind of balanced approach, you're not going to satisfy the people of any city. If you go to community-oriented policing totally and do not respond to their calls for help, do not do something about crime and violence in your community, it is not going to be successful.
All right. Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates, thank you for coming. When we return, we're going to talk to two of the key players in this drama, the prosecutor and one of the defense lawyers.
This portion of Face the Nation is sponsored by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world.
But I could not believe it when I ate it. It was just, they're just absolutely wonderful.
I have learned to like them quite a bit. We take them home and eat them pretty regularly.
They were really delicious. I like them.
They're just good.
Oh, they'd get a 10 for sure.
They're talking about it in the Midwest.
It's quick.
I know it's nutritious. It's going to be good for me.
And Bob has a high cholesterol problem, so they really solve a lot of problems for our whole family.
And soon it may be in the lips of people everywhere.
If he says it's good, it is really good.
Yeah, I like them.
It's the Midland Harvest brand Harvest Burger, an all-vegetable patty from the Archer Daniels Midland Company. Harvest burgers are low in fat, low in calories, free of cholesterol, and contain dietary fiber. Qualities that are in growing demand by today's health-conscious consumers. And what are people saying about the taste? We couldn't have said it better ourselves. ADM, supermarket to the world.
You didn't know you owned an airline, did you? You not only own the planes, you pay for the gas every time some bureaucrat wants to go somewhere. 60 Minutes, tonight.
And we're back now with Prosecutor Terry White and Paul DePasquale, the defense lawyer for Officer Terry Wynn, one of the officers involved. Let me ask you first, Mr. White, have you made a decision yet as to whether you're going to try to prosecute Officer Lawrence Powell, who was the one that, on the one charge where the jury was unable to reach a verdict?
Well, Bob, actually, it's not my decision to make. It's the decision of the District Attorney of Los Angeles County, Ira Reiner. We haven't yet discussed that issue. I believe it'll be discussed sometime this week, and we probably will announce whether or not we will or will not be prosecuting Mr. Powell at a later date.
Now, this would be, you'll have a hearing on this, what, on May 15th?
May 15th.
And have you decided yet, if indeed you do decide to go forward with this, will you call Rodney King as a witness at that hearing?
Well, I don't know. We've received a lot of criticism for not calling Mr. King at this trial. However, we believe it was the right decision based upon our knowledge of Mr. King and based upon some previous statements by Mr. King, which were inconsistent with not only other witnesses' testimony, but also the video. We didn't want to make Mr. King the focus of the trial. We wanted the focus to be on the defendants.
But at this point, the District Attorney's Office has not decided whether it's going to go forward with retrying Mr. Powell.
No, we haven't even had a chance to sit down and discuss that yet.
Mr. DePasquale, let me ask you first. The Justice Department now says it's going to launch an investigation, a civil rights investigation. Do you think that's the right thing to do?
Well, I think it's clearly the kind of thing that would not be done under normal circumstances where there was a vigorous state court prosecution. But the politics in this situation set up a whole new series of concerns and a new set of rules, and they very well might.
Well, do you think that your client can get a fair trial, as it were, under the current circumstances in the country?
Well, it seems on the basis of our experience in Simi Valley that hopefully he can, but it's not really true to say that the issues are fundamentally different in a federal civil rights prosecution. So in essence, it'll be another shot at Tim Wind by the government if he's prosecuted in federal court.
You said that you didn't want to make Mr. King the focus in this trial, but some said you just simply leaned too heavily on the videotape. What do you think that the jurors saw in that videotape that other people did not see? Most people were shocked and appalled when they saw it. How did it happen, Mr.
Well,
White?
I'm still perplexed about how it did happen. I think that videotape was obviously the key piece of evidence in the trial. Well, we believe that videotape showed excessive force being used by these officers, that Mr. King was on the ground, Mr. King was no longer resisting, yet the baton blows continued and continued. So I don't think you can really lean too much on that videotape because that videotape is the key. But we also introduced evidence of false reports by two of the defendants and statements by Officer Powell after the incident where he said, "I haven't beaten anyone this bad in a long time," where he laughed while he called for the ambulance, where he taunted Mr. King at the hospital saying things like, "We hit quite a few home runs tonight. We played a pretty good game of hardball, didn't we?" You know, we thought all of these things together showed unreasonable, unnecessary force. And I think that's why you see the outrage about this decision. The evidence, and as Mr. DePasquale said, the prosecution in this case was quite vigorous, and we thought the evidence quite overwhelming.
Well, what do you think that the jury saw in that tape that the others did not see, Mr. DePasquale?
Well, what they saw, for one thing, Bob, was the whole tape, not an edited portion to be as sensational as possible, selected by the media to make the police look bad. When you looked at the whole tape, when you had all of the evidence as to what happened before Mr. Holliday turned the videotape on, and with the good fortune that he turned it on at the beginning when Mr. King got up and rushed toward Larry Powell.
Yes, sir, but I mean, that man was down on the ground, and they were beating him over the head. I mean, How can that be part of the police's job?
First of all, he wasn't on the ground when it started. They weren't beating him on the head. And as I pointed out in going through the video with the jury in argument, Mr. King was trying to get up. Now, that doesn't make him a bad person, but it made him a problem for these cops. He was trying to get up.
Why didn't they handcuff him?
They tried first. Did you know that? That before the video was turned on, 4 officers were sent in by Sergeant Stacy Kuhn. They tried to handcuff him. He threw them off. Then the video came on. He got up and charged Powell. They tried.
Why did you not try or protest more vigorously than the department did when there was a change of venue? Many say that that's the whole turning point in the case.
Well, we did protest vigorously. We challenged the case in the appellate court when we filed a brief. The appellate court looked at both the arguments and decided there was going to be a change of venue. When we went back to the trial court, and there were 3 locations available to us, we asked for Alameda County, which we thought more closely matched the demographics of Los Angeles County. However, the trial judge in the case, Judge Weisberg, selected Ventura County. And I'm not trying to criticize the trial judge. I believe, based upon the criteria that was available to him, that was the county that should have been selected because the closeness to Los Angeles County and the expense involved. However, I think now the state legislature is going to have to look at some other factors that the judge is going to have to take into consideration, such as demographics. You can't take a case from an urban community like Los Angeles and send it to a very conservative, rural, suburban community like Simi Valley and hope to get a fair trial.
Well, do you think this jury had just made up its mind in advance?
No, I don't think they had made up their mind in advance. One thing that should be pointed out, there were liabilities in this case. Mr. King did cause us several liabilities, such as the fact he was speeding. He did not pull over. He was initially uncooperative once he got out of the car. But we argued to the jury and told the jury in our opening statement, yes, there are these things that are liabilities, but the fact is the force went too far. The baton blows continued and continued while he was on the ground. So I think this was a very difficult case, notwithstanding the videotape.
Mr. DePasquale, what of your client now? Does he want to go back to the police department? What does he want to do with his life? Does he fear for his life?
I would say that he's very concerned about his security. I've spoken with him several times since the verdict. He's really just trying to adjust to the resumption of his life after 14 months of tremendous trauma and being the object of scorn for so long.
What is his response to this violence?
He's very shocked and sad, as we all are, at this violence.
Gentlemen, thanks to both of you. You added perspective this morning. In a moment, we'll talk to Louis Sullivan from the Bush administration when we come back.
Dean Witter believed one thing that should distinguish his brokers is their ability to listen.
Listen not only to what our clients say, but what they mean.
I have a vision about retirement. I know
each client has a level of comfort.
You know me. I'm a planner.
There is no greater dividend a firm can earn than the confidence of its clients.
Help me make some good decisions.
There are many ways to measure success.
We measure success one investor at a time.
They came from different cultures, from different worlds, to create Expo 92. To help them work together, Xerox designed the largest local area network in Europe, linking thousands of people to share ideas and create the documents that let people discover the best in each other. Putting it together. Networking, scanning, printing. Xerox, the document company.
At first, it doesn't seem to be much of a problem. A tire here, a tire there. But it all adds up to the point where Americans dispose of more than 250 million tires a year. But at the Archer Daniels Midland Company, we're doing something about it. We're taking tires that would ordinarily be an environmental problem. We're shredding them and mixing them with coal to create a fuel that burns cleaner in our power plant, providing the energy we need to produce ethanol, a gasoline additive derived from surplus cornstarch that helps reduce carbon monoxide emissions by up to 25%. So as you can see, by using a little ingenuity, we at ADM have got yet another good idea rolling. ADM, supermarket to the world.
And joining us now for a third perspective on the events of the week, Secretary of Health and Human Services Louis Sullivan, who has sort of emerged as the administration's point man on this issue this week. Let me ask you first, Mr. Secretary, is this going to signal a new approach by the Bush administration to urban problems?
I think it's fair to say that the President and all of us are very concerned about the events that we have witnessed the past few days in Los Angeles and in other cities across the country. As you know, the President moved quickly when this occurred. He called me to his office on Thursday morning, along with Attorney General Barr, at which time he ordered that one of the Attorney General's associates be immediately dispensed to Los Angeles to work with local law enforcement officials. He also dispensed Pat Saiki, the director of the Small Business Administration, in response to a conversation he had with Mayor Bradley that morning. He spoke with the mayor and with Governor Wilson while we were there in his office. He's been very busy since that time, and I think it's fair to say all of us are mobilized to do everything we can, not only to restore order, which the President has stressed, but also to really begin the healing process. The President noted in his address to the nation on Friday night the need for all of us to use our diversity to come together rather than to be divided. So we are committed to doing whatever is necessary to address the problems that exist in our cities.
Well, you know, Arthur Fletcher of the Civil Rights Commission said what's needed here is the kind of leadership that Lyndon Johnson used when he started the war on poverty, a massive effort. Are you talking about that kind of thing, or are you talking about just trying to make the system as it is work a little better, a little tuning up on the edges?
No, the President is meeting tomorrow morning with several of his cabinet officers, including myself, to see where we are to address the problems that exist there. I think it's fair to say that he is fully engaged and fully committed to addressing not only the immediate problems of law and order, but also the other problems in our cities. And as the President himself said, we need to have an explanation for what Americans saw on that videotape. I certainly can understand that there may be other evidence or other extenuating factors, but what I saw were 56 blows to a man on the ground. I think it's hard to reconcile that, but the President has emphasized that we must proceed with the judicial system, letting it work, and as you know, there is the civil rights investigation which Attorney General Barr has underway. We need to be sure that all of our citizens have confidence in our judicial system, that our police protect us, that our judicial system works fairly. We are committed to seeing that that happens.
You seem to be placing more emphasis on that side of it than the President did. I know the President said that he was shocked, but I noticed that Congressman Maxine Waters from Watts says that the President's putting too much emphasis on we're going to get tough with the rioters and not enough emphasis on understanding. Do you think she's right about that?
No, the President met for an hour and a half on Friday morning with some 18 or 19 community and civil rights leaders from around the country. In that meeting, which had been scheduled to last only a half hour, but he delayed meetings with governors and with others who were scheduled to see him that morning to have that meeting so he could have a full dialogue with the leadership from the Black and Hispanic communities to understand their perspectives, to get their recommendations and advice. I think that the President is committing tremendous effort to this. However, you must remember that the President does not want to have the judicial system prejudged. We must be sure that the rights of everyone in this situation are protected. So therefore, as President, he clearly cannot be prejudging that situation. But he is committed to seeing that a thorough review is done and that the judicial process works.
This morning, Ross Perot, who may or may not become a presidential candidate, said on another English language broadcast that when the President says things like, I'll do anything necessary to get elected, it could have an impact on this kind of situation. And he said, I will not do anything necessary to be elected because I won't do anything to hurt the country. Do you think the tone of the 1988 campaign and the tone in politics in general that we've seen lately with this emphasis on wedge issues had anything to do with what happened this week?
I think what happened this week would have happened regardless of any other circumstances. I think that we must understand that all of our citizens need to feel that we have a system where there's fairness. And unfortunately, every black American, every black male in this society can describe for you situations in their lifetimes where they, in spite of being well-educated, in spite of being successful, in spite of having offices such as Assistant to the President of the United States, Assistant to the Vice President of the United States, Secretary of Health and Human Services, we can describe for you personal instances where things have occurred, and knowing that, where we have been law-abiding citizens, we have been successful in the system, yet knowing that there are times when people will prejudge you by the color of your skin before any of that else is brought forth, we can understand the frustration for those who have not been as fortunate. So clearly, we must be sure that we do everything to be understanding, to be compassionate, and to start the healing process, but at the same time, we are a nation of laws. We must have respect for the judicial system and the judicial process, and that applies to all of our citizens, but it also means that those in power and authority must have respect and compassion for all of our citizens.
Mr. Secretary, we have about 30 seconds left. Let me just ask you quickly, does the President plan to appoint one official to sort of be in charge of what happens after this? Will there be a point man, as it were?
Well, as I indicated, the President, of course, has some 14 members of his cabinet. He immediately called the Attorney General and me to his office on Thursday morning. He has been in touch with other members of his cabinet. He's meeting with 3 of us tomorrow morning. That's his decision to make, but all of us are ready to work with the President. The President is the point man. He is the leader of our country.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. That's it for this week. See you next week on Face the Nation.
He could have had the 60-foot sailboat, the house on the 18th green. But all Ned Crowley ever really wanted was a home on the range. At Dean Witter, our retirement plans are as individual as the people who dream them.
We measure success one investor at a time.
Well, boys, how do you like the new backyard?
They came from different cultures, from different worlds, to create Expo 92. To help them work together, Xerox designed the largest local area network in Europe, linking thousands of people to share ideas and create the documents that let people discover the best in each other. Putting it together. Networking, scanning, printing. Xerox, the document company.
This portion of Face the Nation was sponsored by Dean Witter. There are many ways to measure success. Dean Witter measures success one investor at a time. And by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world. This broadcast was produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guests and topics. It originated in Washington, D.C.
Are you an easy target for a con artist?
Slim Slam, dollar Slim Slam.
You won't be if you watch Scam on 48 Hours Wednesday.
This is CBS.
Graduate student Gong Lu fires shots and lives are changed forever. 6 are dead and 1 survives. This is her story.
I can't really give up, so you can look toward the future.
For the first time since the shooting, Mia Seelson talks to TV8's Jill Lingwall about that tragic day and what the future holds. Don't miss this very special series, Sole Survivor, the Mia Seelson story. Tonight on the TV8 News, live at 10.
For the most live coverage at noon.